Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here for another one of our Alumni Career Conversations. These sessions have been getting very positive reviews as a way to keep us all connected and informed on how different areas of the industry are responding to change. And obviously, we've had quite a bit of change over the last year or so. Throughout the session, please feel free to enter any questions directly into the chat box as you think of them. We will also open the conversation for direct questions toward the end of the session. We do ask that throughout the session, until we do get to that direct question portion, that you keep yourself muted. I will now turn the lead over to Dean Michael Speaks, who will be facilitating our session and will introduce our guest for this evening. Michael?
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks for the introduction. Great. I look out and I see a lot of familiar faces. Great to see everybody here tonight. You can turn on your camera, or doesn't matter. You don't have to have it on, but it's always great to see people. So as Kristen said, we've been, I don't know how many of these we've done, maybe as many as 10. And these are essentially events to introduce our alum and in some cases our board members to our current students, thesis students, those who are contemplating going onto the job market, and in some cases students who graduated last year, but to the school in general. Mostly we've been having conversations about different industry sectors, about firms, what are the trends, who's hiring, is it a good time, is it a terrible time? And tonight we've been doing this mostly with as I said, well, almost exclusively with alum. And tonight we have two terrific alum. First, I'll do the introductions and then we'll have a few questions. That essentially it's a pretty informal conversation. If you have questions along the way, just type them in to the chat and I'll kind of weave them in. And then we'll have a session at the end. And if you have questions you want to ask directly to our speakers, then we invite you to do so. First, let me introduce Rich Granoff. Rich is a 1984 B.Art grad. He's the founder of Granoff Architects, which is in Greenwich, Connecticut. He's a board member, and we're thrilled to have him tonight. Also, we're joined tonight by Garland deGraffenried, who's a managing director of SHVO, which is a real estate development company in New York City. Garland is a 2009 graduate. And yeah, so maybe I'll start by, I'll start by saying thank you, Rich and Garland, for joining us tonight. It's great to see you. And maybe I'll start by asking you, either of you, say a little bit about what your time at Syracuse was like, and how did your professional degree in architecture prepare you to get to where you are now, and maybe tell us a little bit about about that, about your time and how you about the trajectory of your career a little bit. Maybe Rich, you could start. Rich, you're still you're muted.
Yeah, first Zoom call ever. Yeah. So thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be doing this. I enjoy speaking to other architects or aspiring architects about a career in architecture. So I went right from high school to Syracuse Architecture. I was naive, and I had a really good 5-year experience at the school. At the time, the dean was Werner Seligman, who's kind of like a legendary architecture dean, coming from Cornell. And the faculty was young and spectacular. And I immersed myself in, as you all know, a very productive 5 years at SU, including a semester in Florence, Italy, with another legendary person, Randall Corman, at the time. And he was also kind of, he was a mentor to me. So I had just awesome experience. And I felt when I graduated, I was ready to hit the mean streets of New York City. And I went to New York City and met 2 other Syracuse alumni. One was David Rockwell and the other was Jay Haverson. And they hired me right out of school. I think they were 3 years out of Syracuse and they hired me. And I spent the next 4 years working with them in New York City. And I really feel that between my design education I got at Syracuse and the real world experience I got with David Rockwell, at the ripe young age of 28, I started Granoff Architects. In retrospect, I was very naive, but and also in retrospect, it was probably one of the best decisions I made in my life, because I've been working for myself for the last 32 years. And along the way, I started doing some work for real estate developers. And I really took an interest in getting involved in real estate development. I enjoyed both the business side and the design side. And fast forwarding, I've now got, besides Granoff Architects, I've got a real estate development company called Granoff Real Estate. And we've kind of started small with spec houses and some smaller renovations. And we're currently have 3 or 4 ground up, mostly multifamily and mixed use development projects, 3 or 4 completed and 3 or 4 in development. And I'm really excited about where that business is going, and the synergies between my architectural practice and my real estate development practice are really, they really work well together, as far as one helping the other along the way. And just a quick note about Granoff Architects: we're a suburban practice in Greenwich, Connecticut. We have 26 design professionals, including 3 landscape architects and 3 full-time interior designers. And we work on a very wide range of project types, from luxury homes to 500-unit multifamily projects, and really everything in between, including a restaurant here or there, commercial interiors work, office building renovation, and a lot of historic and adaptive reuse, I would say. If you look at my website, the Granoff Architects building in downtown Greenwich is a 100-year-old kind of power plant that we bought and converted. And that's really gotten us a lot of more historic and adaptive reuse projects. So that's the kind of short version. I'll let other people speak, and then we'll sure circle back to questions.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. It's, it sounds like things have not changed at all. Legendary dean is still here, and great young faculty. I thought you were describing our current school there for a second. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. Garland.
Yeah. I mean, I would echo a lot of what Rich said. I think for me, personally, the most influential part of being at Syracuse, I think, was certainly the Visiting Critics Studio. That really allowed us the opportunity to start to kind of merge what we're learning academically, theoretically, with practicing architects that have firms in New York City, around the country, around the globe, to come in and work with us. I was probably still am one of the very small percentage of people that decided not to go abroad, because I felt like the VC studio I had was so powerful. I wanted another one. And In my second VC studio that I stayed, I met a gentleman, Gerald Delavale, who's now the president and CEO of Alloy Development, who many of you may know. And he really, put a perspective in front of me about architecture and what it can do in the built environment, and how really a different narrative of how we should be shaping the urban environment, right? And a lot of times, Jared was a very successful architect for 10 years, had a great practice, and got to the point where he wanted to do design for himself. He felt like the only way to really do that meaningfully was to become a developer. So he kind of took that on and found himself in a great opportunity with access to capital to be able to do that and pursue that dream of his. And so he and I stayed in touch. I interned for him while he still had his architectural firm while I was at school. And then, when I graduated in 2009, it was basically the bottom of the financial crisis for a lot of us. And it was very challenging, not dissimilar from what everyone's facing right now with COVID in many ways. But, we built that relationship through the school and through the internship outside of school. And we just stayed in touch. And about a year later, he called me up and said, "Hey, I want you to come work for me, but now I want you to come work for me on the development side." So, I was his first employee. I was there. I started there in 2010, and we did 4 projects in Dumbo, Brooklyn. We did 2 warehouse conversions. We did a townhouse ground-up development of 5 townhouses. And by the time I left, we finished construction documents on 1 John Street, which is a large waterfront condo building. It was all residential work. But the uniqueness there for me was that, we were the design architects. We drew all the drawings. We managed all the consultants. We were even the architect of record, and we were the owner, right? And so we were able to make decisions very quickly. I could turn my chair over to Jared and say, "Hey, what do you want to do about this detail?" And we could figure it out. He's also incredibly smart when it comes to the bricks and sticks, as I call it, which is really like how to construct the actual building itself. So he has a degree in construction management. He worked on that side of the business for a while. So he's really kind of this true Swiss Army knife. So, without that opportunity to meet him through the visiting critic program at Syracuse, who knows, my career could have taken a different path. But it was a really great experience to be able to work closely with practicing architects at the school. I think that was probably the most important. Maybe, not so far behind is obviously the career services department at Syracuse at the time, who was led by Connie. And, all these things together, everything that the university brings, I think allowed me to be really well prepared to get out in the real world.
Well, thanks for both those opening sort of comments and remarks. Maybe I would ask you a little bit, because our theme tonight is, or let's say the industry sector we're talking about a little bit is real estate development, but maybe conventional and non-conventional real estate development, because Alloy really comes from architecture and is really design value added to real estate. And Jared, whom you mentioned, really was able to do a lot of things in that sector because he knew design so well and could kind of finesse that aspect of real estate practice. So I guess it's maybe the question is about the real estate sector, but also about the extent to which real estate, real estate development and real estate as a practice, students, I think at one time found distasteful and let's say were allergic to it because it was about profit and all those things that we know, and of course it is about that, but both of you have talked already about how being involved in the real estate sector actually gives designers and gives those who are conversant with the language of real estate and understand that world a kind of a degree of freedom of practice that you probably wouldn't have maybe Rich, could you say something about that? Because it sounds like, you know, I know it's the case that your architecture practice, as you said, has a kind of a symbiotic relationship to the real estate development that you have been involved in, both in Greenwich but elsewhere. And you know, what's also interesting is you're both trained as architects. Neither of you did real estate. Let's say you didn't do a Columbia degree or NYU, but you kind of learned it from the ground up and have brought to real estate all of the things that a 5-year professional architecture degree and high quality design do. So Rich, maybe could you tell us, maybe say a little bit more about, yeah, how this works between your architecture and real estate practice, and maybe just about real estate in general as approaching it as an architect.
Sure, and I think Garland hit on one of the points, the big points before, which is, you know, you could say getting into real estate development is about making money, or it's that part of our industry and of the big bad developers. But to me, the real joy is that I get to control the design of my own projects, as opposed to, you know, what someone else's opinion is on the architecture. And that's the real fun part, in addition to the efficiency that Garland also referenced, which is, you know, I go to a job site as both the owner and the architect. I make a decision on the fly and it gets expedited. Sometimes that could be a 2-week process to get a client to sign off on a change I want to make at the job site. And it's just, it's really efficient, and it allows me to spend more time doing design, you know, rather than paperwork for a client. And the more I design my own development projects, the more I really only want to do my own development projects within my firm. You know, that said, we've got, you know, a couple of dozen clients, and more I find myself only really wanting to work on my own projects, or just my own plus a couple of the best projects in the office. You know, it's a nice luxury to have, but, you know, I've worked 30 something years to get there. And as far as not ever having taken a real estate course, that's has been a little bit of a liability along the way. I certainly learned a lot from my clients. I certainly can get my way through a pro forma or a spreadsheet, but the timing is ironic, because for the last 2 weeks, I took a Harvard GSD course online in Real Estate Finance 101. And I highly recommend anybody on the Zoom call that's interested in getting into real estate is to take that course either at Syracuse or somewhere along the way, because it's very important to understand the fundamentals of finance if you're going to be getting involved in multi-million-dollar projects. And it's indispensable to have that knowledge. So.
Garland?
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think, you know, look, developers get a bad rap sometimes, because I think you have situations, as a real estate developer, you have such a deep responsibility to the urban environment and what you bring and what you build. These buildings are going to be around for hundreds of years, right? And so when you see a building that goes up with no thought or no intent, and, you know, you really look at it more of like something that they produce to be a cash cow, then yeah, they're going to get a kind of a bad rap. I think, you know, when you talk about real estate developers being greedy or talking about the bottom line, ultimately, you know, everything's a business, whether you're running an architectural studio or you're running a real estate development company. It's just about how you go about it. And I don't think, you know, for us at Alloy, you know, it was about doing the right thing for the community, and we felt like the money would follow. And the thesis held true for, you know, almost all the projects we worked on. We were very successful. I think we happened to be in a really good market at the time too. You know, so there's that. And then when I got out of Alloy and moved on to a more traditional developer, it became, you know, for me, it became more about how to curate the best building possible amongst all the investors and the shareholders of the project, right? And it's a different way to think about it. But I think the other thing that's important to note, especially for you guys who are building your architectural skill set and your creative skill set, architects bring such a different perspective to the industry of real estate. You guys are always searching and searching and searching for the right answer, and you want to iterate and iterate and iterate problems, which I think is really, really valuable. When you have, you know, and not to say this in the wrong way, but when you do have more of a business mind running a creative process, they're trained to think of how to get to the answer the fastest way possible. Not necessarily how to get to that answer the best way possible, the most creative way possible. So the skill set that you guys are building right now, I think, is wildly valuable, which is one of the reasons why, you know, I haven't needed to necessarily go back and get my real estate degree. You know, I learned a lot just going through the process and, you know, being with Jared and then being at a larger developer for a lot of times. And, you know, you pick up the things on the financial end and you pick up the things on the legal end and how to deal with, you know, the crazy neighbor or how to negotiate a contract. And that stuff, I think, comes easy. What doesn't come easy for people is understanding the nuances of building and architecture. That takes a 5-year degree. That takes a graduate degree to really to foster and grow.
Garland, I really appreciate those comments. You know, we have as many of you may know, we have a Florence program, a London program, and we have a New York City program. And each of those programs kind of focuses on, well, in Florence, it focuses on the Renaissance, and London on a variety of projects and practices around the city. And in New York, most of all of our courses there focus on real estate, and we teach real estate kind of 101 there. Sean Amsler does, and in fact, we're starting a master's of science degree in real estate development in New York City in the Fisher Center. It was in fact supposed to start this year, but it was delayed because of COVID. We'll start it again next year. But Garland, just to pick up on a point you made, when we've talked with advisors and with potential employers, especially in the real estate sector, because we run, in New York City, we run these internships there for both real estate students and for architecture students in real estate firms and in architecture firms. And what we hear over and over and over in the real estate firms is they love to get, as interns and as early employees, architects with students with professional degrees in architecture, precisely because of the point you just made, which is, in some weird ways, it's easier to teach architects real estate than it's impossible to teach business people architecture. I think both of those are really, really important and really terrific points. I want to pivot a little bit, Garland, and maybe go to you and then go back to Rich. But you talked, Garland, about Alloy and about working in more traditional firms. At SHVO now, you're in a slightly different sector of the real estate market or real estate world. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing there now? I mean, I look at your website and I just want to be you now, right? I look at that. So you guys should go to this website. I want to like quit my job tonight and just go and try to be like Garland. It's a super site. What do you do every day? What do you doing in your job now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll say, before SHVO, I worked for 3 different developers: Alloy, Toll Brothers, and DDG, and they were all primarily focused on the residential market. Alloy and DDG obviously were private companies, and Toll Brothers, which I was at for 5 years, is obviously a very large public company, but they're known for their suburban McMansions and developments and things like that. And I think one of the things we've seen over the last, 8, 9, 10 years is sort of a really big oversupply of residential product in New York City, which has created a bit of a problem for residential developers, which I could bore you to death with. But Ultimately I decided to move to a company that was private again and had the ability to pivot into different asset classes, which I think in today's market is really, really important, especially when now you're talking about COVID. And we look at everything, right? So we don't do a lot of residential right now. We do have some residential development, but the majority of the work that we do right now is commercial office. We will operate amongst many different asset classes. So when I say that, I mean residential, commercial, hospitality, but we also work across many investment classes. So that means, short-term holds, mid-term holds, long-term holds. Right now, we're really focused on the commercial long-term side, which means we're going out, we're buying larger buildings. We just purchased the Transamerica Tower in San Francisco. We just purchased a 1.2 million square foot building in Chicago called Big Red, if you guys know Chicago skyline. We have a large scale development down in Miami Beach, which is residential. We have 3 other properties in New York. So, what we do here, I run the development group and we oversee the properties in the Northeast. So the 3 in New York and then our asset in Chicago. And they all have varying degrees of need. One is a more traditional development. It's a major conversion of a really large building on Fifth Avenue. And then we also oversee smaller improvements. So right now we're doing something that's a lobby renovation, for instance, on one of our buildings that's 100% leased, right? It sounds a little maybe boring, but I can't disclose the architect right now, but it's a really exciting architect out in New York City who's also an artist. And we're doing another conversion on our other building on Fifth Avenue where we're going to be taking off the roof and putting on a new kind of jewel box on top with another really exciting architect. So, the reason also I came here is Michael SHVO is extremely creative, very ambitious. He loves the kind of ultra luxury, ultra prime markets, and he likes really exciting work. So we get to be involved in that on a day-to-day basis, and our group goes out and executes these business plans.
And you all have been working with, a lot of, let's say, high-profile architects and firms across, not only across the U.S. but across the world. Maybe, Rich, I mean, in a way, your story is the creation of a firm and then a development wing of that. It's a kind of business story as well as a development and architecture story. Is it possible now for students? Is it possible for young architects to do what you did? And what does that world look like? I'm curious, because one of the things we hear over and over and over, and I see Jake on here, so he's probably had this conversation with you as well, Jake. How do you, so many of our graduates are, yes, they're interested in conventional practice, maybe theoretically, but in fact, a lot of them don't. A lot of our students, fewer and fewer of our students see conventional practice as the only path for them. And so they see a lot of alternatives. Real estate offers one alternative. Obviously, developing your own firm and putting yourself in a position to do only the kind of projects you want to do is another. Is it possible still, Rich, for young architects and for, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think it's possible. I started my firm. I got hired to do a house by, a friend of a friend, and at the time, it was a $500,000 project at the time. It was huge, it's huge, I was like, and I just, I did a couple of houses, and then that grew into a few more interesting projects. And then I said, you know what, I'm going to hang out a shingle and work out of my living room. So that's how I started my business, and it just grew organically. I like to think I added 1 employee per year for the first 10 years. So, after 10 years, I had a 10-person practice, and we were still small and doing some interesting projects, but generally small projects. And then I started meeting some real estate developers and, getting involved in some development projects. And, I took a liking to that part of the business. But, the next 10 years was still kind of, slow organic growth. And along the way, we had recessions, and when we were 15 people, we had whatever recession that was, probably before you guys were born. But then, I went down to 7, and then we kind of built it back up again. And the next recession, we were at 20 and we went down to 15. And, so it was never, the goal was never to grow a business that was either a certain number of people or a certain dollar volume. It was just to continue on a relatively slow growth path. And then when I started doing real estate development, really it was the same thing. I partnered up with a client to do a spec house, which, as you guys probably know, you build a house and hope that someone's going to buy it. And it's actually a really interesting way to get into real estate development. And even an easier way is to renovate a house. So you buy a house and fix it up and flip it. And it sounds easy, and it sounds like anybody can do it. But to do that and make a couple of bucks is it's not so easy. So there's some risks that need to be taken, and obviously there needs to be some equity along the way. That could either be your equity or a family equity or friends equity or something like that. And then you do 1 or 2 of those, and you just keep building. Hopefully that things go well. But there are pitfalls along the way, and certainly it's easier to lose money in real estate development than it is in architectural practice, where there's higher risk and higher reward in real estate development than there is in a fee-based business model, which is what architectural services are. So I highly encourage the interest for younger architects, and not to feel like you can't do it. You just got to be persistent, and so a lot of it's about relationships. My whole career has been about relationships and meeting people and developing those relationships, and keeping clients happy so they come back and want to hire you again, and building a nice small development so that people take notice, and then you can get into a bigger development. All of that said, I'm at the opposite end of the real estate world than Garland is. My current project that I'm developing is a 26 unit, 5-story suburban rental building. It's a luxury building, but 30% of the units are affordable. And I'm proud of that, that I'm giving back to the community by building affordable units. And at the same time, it's the only way to really build in a lot of the markets that I'm in, is to do affordable units, to uncork value where others don't understand how to make the projects work. So that's one of my niches, is doing some affordable units in the buildings, and you get bonuses when you do that in general. I'm sure Garland can speak more about that in a larger scale project as well.
Maybe I ask you, Rich, maybe first, and Garland, what do you with COVID? I assume you are, well, maybe I won't assume anything. Are you is the firm? Are you all working from home? Are you working at the office? Is it a hybrid situation? How are you dealing with that? And then, that's one question. The other question is, how do you see COVID affecting both architecture and the practice of architecture and real estate? There are certain typologies now within the real estate sector that seem to will have to be rethought. Office spaces, obviously, parking will eventually have to be rethought. So yeah, how are you all working? And then what trends do you see? What as a result of COVID do you think we're gonna see in the sectors that you all work in? Rich, are you going? Yeah, maybe you could start.
I'll quickly just touch base on what we're doing in the office. In Connecticut, architecture and construction was considered essential. So we've kind of been in the office since the beginning, other than the first couple of months. And we've slowly phased back into not mandatory, but kind of encouraged to come in at least a couple of days a week. Everybody's working remotely sometime. And I think this might be the model going forward, which is we can work remotely, but we also find it's much better to be in the office and collaborating with careful protocols, et cetera. As far as the effect of COVID on our world, on our design, it depends what market segment you're talking about. The office commercial world, commercial offices, which I do a lot of, is really still trying to figure it all out. It's everything from companies are never going back to an office, Google, to we're already back 100%. And I think it's going to vary by the industry, by the firm, by the location. I don't think there's a one answer to that. I do think in the multifamily and residential that the general trend right now is out of the cities. It's the suburbs, which is where I am, which is why we're busier than ever. And I do think it's larger spaces, work at home spaces, and outdoor opportunities, either with terraces or communal outdoor areas. And that's probably a trend that will continue, because as we all know, now that we can all work at home, I think we will all work at home. If not all the time, it'll be part of the time. And one other factor that's affecting real estate development that neither Garland or I brought up yet is really low interest rates is something that is fueling the real estate development world like we've never seen. Interest rates are at maybe a historic low as far as I'm concerned. So, and Garland's shaking his head. So, okay.
Yeah, no, totally. I think, the fact that interest rates are this low is really fueling the fire for the suburban boom, which is a real thing. I think and by the way, we've been back in the office since July. So we were out for a short period of time and then we all kind of came back. I think we're much more productive in the office. It's nice to work remote from home and all those things, but it's a really collaborative industry and you kind of have to be on site and in the office to be productive. But when you look at COVID's effect on real estate of the industry, I think the way that I look at it is sort of sector by sector, right? And it's affected each sector very differently than the others. And so, these impacts would and do trickle down to also employment opportunities or where you might see growth, in architectural or development paths. So there's sector-based impacts and then there's geographic-based impacts. And sector-based impacts like residential, for instance, Rich is right. Like people moved out of New York City in droves and they bought homes, in the tri-state area, in the suburbs. And, those things, when people are going and doing that, they're leaving their home in the city and buying a place in the suburbs, that's not so easily undone, right? Like you just bought a house and you have a mortgage and you're planting your roots there. People aren't going to just so easily come back to the city. I don't think that the city is dead, but we had a major supply and demand problem before COVID happened. And it's only gotten worse because, when you have really large buildings that have hundreds of units in them that are in the middle of construction, you can't just stop, right? You can't pack up and go home. You have to finish the job. So there hasn't been any buying happening over this period, but there's been more and more and more product being put on the market. So we got to chew through all that first. I think, and that's on the sales side. I think on the rental side, it's really bad, right? And people are offering a lot of concessions. It's never been this cheap to rent in New York City. It's still not cheap, by the way, but it's never been this cheap. So anyway, that's what you want to look at in terms of the residential sector. On the commercial sector, I totally agree with Rich. There's two theories out there. One is companies are going to lease more space so that they can have greater social distancing within the office. And the other theory is that people are going to downsize and treat their office more as a satellite office and allow, a portion of their staff to work remotely. I'm in that camp. My boss is in the other camp. And so time will tell. I think we'll see what happens. We don't really know. But I got a steak dinner riding on that bet. And then hospitality, I'm really bullish on hospitality, actually, because I think people are so pent up and they want to travel. And as soon as they have the opportunity to do it, they will. And if I'm a hotel developer or if I'm an architect that works in a lot of hospitality projects, I'm going to want to be the new kid on the block when people start traveling again, right? The hotel industry is very cyclical. Like you become very stale very quickly if you're not the new guy. So that's one sector I'm sort of bullish on. And then, retail, which is the last one, boy, that was sort of a mess. I mean, I think that was on its last leg before COVID, especially in New York. We had, the resurgence of technology and all the online shopping. But I think if you actually got to break, it's unfair to look at it that broadly. I think you have to look at it on a socioeconomic level, meaning you have your more of your pedestrian brands, I guess we'll call mass market brands, and then you have your ultra high luxury brands. And I think the ultra high luxury brands will be okay in the long term. Like I don't think the LVMH stores of the world are going to be going anywhere. And in fact, the CEO, Bernard Arnault, is spending a lot of money in all of his locations to upgrade his stores in anticipation that people are going to come back to shop. So there's that. And then on the geographical side, I think you're going to start to see a lot more opportunities. You're going to see expedited growth, I think, in these secondary and tertiary markets in the Austin, Texases of the world, the Nashvilles, the Denvers. They were already growing pretty rapidly. And now that people have the choice of being able to live somewhere and work remotely, they're going to want to find the best life balance that they can, work-life balance that they can. And that's not always going to be New York City necessarily, right? So things like that, I think, will become opportunistic for people.
What maybe could ask you both, what impact do you think that is going to have on the job market? And maybe could you, because we have a number of students on tonight who are interested, obviously, in the job market. What does that look like in Rich? What does that look like in architecture world right now? Short, medium, long term? Because we've had a number of discussions with friends and colleagues and alum and board members, and many of them, while their firms right now are kind of parked a little bit and they're not as busy as they had been. And they're not as busy as either of you, actually, in very different places and different sectors. They are nonetheless quite positive. Their appraisal is very positive about the medium and longer term, not only just for the industry, but also for jobs. Maybe could each of you say something about that? Rich, maybe both about architecture and about the kind of real estate sector where you are.
Yep. So as I said, I'm in a suburban architecture practice, and I'm a suburban real estate developer. I have zero interest in going to New York City, regardless of post-COVID. My niche is what I call the northern luxury suburbs of New York City, Westchester and Fairfield County. And I am extremely bullish for both my architectural practice, where I see us, growing and getting larger and larger mostly multifamily projects, both condominiums and rentals. We're doing a lot of adaptive reuse. We're converting, a lot of office buildings into apartments, warehouses into apartments. I think that the demand is feverish for new rental product, and I think it's almost has not that much to do with COVID, to be honest with you. It has to do with an aging housing stock, and it has to do with an aging demographic, where you have a lot of empty nesters, people my age, that are starting to say, the kids are leaving the house, and we want to either buy a luxury condo or rent a really nice apartment, maybe, move to Florida, whatever it might be. There's a lot of stories, but there's really not a great housing stock out there in the luxury suburbs that I know of. Not a lot has been built for all kinds of reasons. My markets have been focused on single family homes for the last 30 years. And now there's an oversupply of single family homes, and there's an undersupply of apartment buildings, especially nice apartment buildings, or architecture, if you will. So I'm really bullish, and as a developer, because of those metrics, I'm bullish. And as long as interest rates stay low, I want to continue to build multifamily projects. And personally, for me and for my family, we're in a build and hold situation. I want to build apartment buildings and keep them as income producing properties, hopefully for generations. That's how I look at my real estate development business.
Rich, let me just follow up on that quickly. I have a couple of questions here. I'll ask those in a second. But what about your colleagues in the area, in your geographical area? Are they hiring? What's the job market look like? Are you hiring? What about internships? What does that all look like right now? Are you guys holding? What's happening?
We held last year, and I'm going to say we're probably in a growth mode this year. We're 26 people. If I had to guess, we'll hire 3 or 4 people sometime this year. We're waiting to hear back on a lot of really big projects, including Nashville. You mentioned Nashville, hot market that we've got a couple of projects cooking there, and South Florida, also hot market that we're starting to do some design work in, not development. I'm pretty sure most of my colleagues, like in my area, are residential firms doing houses, and I'm pretty sure they're all busy. But I know that the relatively larger firms, which are 20, 30 person firms in my area, I think are all doing well, and I would say either holding or hiring, not laying off anymore. So,
right. Well, Rich, we have a building full of great graduates up here coming out this year, and so when you need to hire them, just give us a call. We've got all the talent you need, and tell your friends the same. I know you know that already.
Got it. I thank you. I didn't mention that I've historically hired Syracuse grads. They're always.
I knew you
best,
did. I knew you did. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to say that, not me.
Yeah, no, and I have.
And we appreciate.
Yeah. A lot of my senior staff are Syracuse grads, and Syracuse always puts out the best employees. So.
This is why I invited Rich tonight. Thanks, Rich. Garland, maybe what's the job market in real estate look like, and I'm going to pick up on maybe one of the questions in the chat and just say, like, for architects who have a professional degree in architecture looking to move into that sector, what does the job market look like in general in your sector? And then what is what does that move look like? How do you make that move? And yeah.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. I mean, I think that, first of all, the state of the union of the job market in New York City relative to real estate developers, it's not as rosy as maybe everyone would like to hear, right? I think I've talked to a lot of recruiters and placement professionals the last couple of weeks leading up to this, because I wanted to kind of get their insight, and they have their their nose to the ground on all this stuff. But I think what their takeaway is that a lot of the companies have sort of stopped the bleeding in a way, and now everyone's seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and they're sort of waiting and holding and waiting for this vaccine to roll out and hope things pick back up. And I think that that's generally true. For us, exclusively at SHVO, we sorry, to wait people out of my office. We have the luxury of having access to really patient capital that's coming from overseas, which is different than capital, obviously, in the U.S. And I think that's a nuanced factor, but that's been able to give us the opportunity to close on, two really large properties, even through COVID. So I think in terms of the general market in development, people are holding tight in New York City. I do think that you're now seeing development opportunities in the suburbs, like Rich is seeing, or in these secondary markets, like Seattle is a really great secondary market. Denver is a really great secondary market, in Austin, Texas as well. And they're seeing a lot of growth still, even Dallas, for instance. So the opportunities for real estate development are out there. I think New York is just, a bit tricky right now. for that. So that's kind of where we're at now. In terms of transitioning, if you're an architect or an architecture student and you want to get into real estate development, there's a few ways to do that. I was fortunate given the connection that I had. And I think if you do find groups that have an in-house design team, a lot of these developers do have in-house design teams that do the QA/QC on the drawings or really manage the architect or do that kind of thing. You can kind of get in that way. I think the trend has been going out and getting a master's degree in real estate development, especially in New York, because it's so competitive. And you've had like the main two, which Dean, but which is Columbia and NYU. And people those alumni bases are extremely strong in real estate. And so a lot of people have gone through that way. There are other ways too, though. Like if you work for a large firm, like an SOM or a KPF, or that do really complex, large urban scale projects, and you're bringing these things through from conception all the way through to execution. Once you get that on your resume and you have that on your track record, it's a little bit easier to step into the real estate game.
Great answers. What about internships? Are those, Garland? I don't know if you noticed, Garland, when you mentioned LVMH, I couldn't help but put my Syracuse Architecture, our own version of that up. If anyone wants some nice swag, go to our website. You can go there. You can go to Resources Digital Swag and pick up Lunar New Year, Black History Month, LVMH, all kinds of things. You can pick it up there. But Garland, what about, and maybe Rich too, internships? What's the internship situation look like in your sectors now?
Yeah, I think, for us, it's like we want to make sure we provide the best experience possible. And, that really means for us what that means. And for others that I've spoken to, it means making sure that people can be in the office. And different companies are in different states of that. And I think it is challenging a bit. It's not to say that companies won't do it, but I do think it's a bit more of a challenge when you have an intern that's working remotely with the team you can't interact with. And, that's all about the experience. But I think this summer, for sure, I think is going to be much, much better. If the vaccines really start to pick up and roll out and people are more comfortable and we can get through this, call it by May or June, I think it's going to be okay for the summer.
Rich, what do you think? What about internships? Are you all doing those this year? Are you doing them remote? Or are they in person? What's the story?
Well, we haven't really addressed that issue quite yet. We just want to make sure we get over this, kind of COVID hurdle here. But assuming that, COVID goes in the right direction by the summer, and we get as many new projects as we're expecting, I would fully, and we typically have 1 or 2 internships every summer, and I would intend that we would do the same this summer.
We don't like to keep our guests all night, so maybe I'll ask if there are any questions from the audience. You could unmute and ask your question, or you could type it in. Probably no GameStop stock tips are going to be offered tonight, but any other kinds of questions about job market, anything? Anybody? Any closing questions?
Hey, Garland, I have a question. Have you seen any, I guess, kind of developments since you kind of focus on, I guess you said offices and doing, I guess, more commercial spaces and converting those into residential? I've heard that is a trend in some major cities.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's funny you bring this up because we're doing the opposite right now. We have a residential, what was going to be a residential development, we're actually converting it back to office because we feel like the risk right now in residential is so incredibly high. And we were looking at a situation where the risk position was we may not return capital back to our partners, which is a really bad place to be, versus pivoting to commercial office and being able to have something that's cash flow positive. And it's tricky and it's really scary because you're in the middle of a construction job and you're trying to change the whole business model, right? So that things like that are certainly happening across the city. I think going from commercial to residential absolutely would happen a lot, and still probably does. But I think you're going to start to see the trend maybe go the other way in certain instances as well. Or, what you might even see is residential developments that were once for sale now having to do a fallback scenario where it's fully rental, or it's rental that converts to condo later because the buyer pool just isn't there right now. And then in even different instances, what you're seeing is you're also seeing hotel conversions. You have a lot of failed hotels going on. So you're seeing hotel conversions to condominiums. So a lot of this kind of stuff is happening, and you find those distressed properties. And this trend typically happens when you have major global economic events like this, or with the financial crisis, for instance.
Yeah, I agree 100%. In my part of the world, in the suburbs, we're working on at least a half dozen conversions of office buildings to residential, and that's simply that the office market got overbuilt in the 80s and 90s and O's. And no one focused on residential, and now the tide's turning, and they're actually very interesting architectural projects because they have their own particular challenges. One project I'm working on is really cool. It was a converted mill, an old 120-year-old mill, is converted to office buildings in the 80s, and the same developer, his kids are now converting it from office buildings to apartments, and so this, life cycles of buildings, and they're beautiful old brick buildings. So it's kind of satisfying to take, a building and convert it from one use to another, rather than tearing it down.
Rich, I thought for a second you were going to say his children were going to convert that building back into a mill, and that would have been super over the top.
Well,
in Brooklyn, maybe in Brooklyn they do that.
Maybe the next generation will do that. It's on a waterfall.
I think that's a Brooklyn project. Rich, Garland, do you all have any parting advice for students as we are all beginning to make applications and push CVs out? Do's, don'ts, any advice is much appreciated. What do you all? Anything at all?
Well, I think,
for me,
go ahead.
You got it, Garland. You're.
I was just going to echo something you said earlier, actually, Rich. And I think this industry, architecture and development, is a relationship-based industry for sure. And I think you should certainly be leveraging all the resources you have at the university and all the connections that you meet at lectures, or at any other events that you guys attend through the school. And make sure to stay always in touch with anyone you've done internships with before, and that sort of thing. That's going to be what really propels you. No one is ever going to be fully prepared for an event like this, and so the thing that's always for sure is your relationship and your network. So just always fostering that as you kind of move along your trajectory.
And what I was going to say is, if you truly are interested in real estate, maybe it's a minor, or maybe you want to go down that path, definitely take that finance course. So you understand when people are talking to you about NOIs and cash on cash returns and stuff like that. For many years I was kind of winging it, just kind of getting it, and so for me it was better late than never. But I think having that skill set as an architect to really understand what's going on in real estate development, that's going to help you go down that path when you meet a developer and you start talking about real estate development. I think understanding the fundamentals, obviously we know how to design buildings, that's what we're trained for, but knowing the development side is really important, and go for it.
Well, we have kept you probably longer than we should have, but I want to thank you both, Rich and Garland. It's been a great conversation. Love to have you back. Appreciate very much. Students, may have questions or follow-up, and if they do, they can send them to us, or we'll push them to you as well. But I want to thank you both for your time tonight and for connecting to future Syracuse architecture students. I want to thank everybody else for coming tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces. Hope you come back. We have some more events. Please pay attention to our calendar. And Kristen is just simply saying, I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen and let Kristen take us out. But thank you all for coming. And thanks again, Rich and Garland. Kristen?
Yes, as Dean Speak said, thank you all for participating tonight. Our next session will actually be in 2 weeks on February 17th, again at 6 p.m. And we will be talking a little bit about equity architecture. So we hope you can all join us on that day as well. So I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's conversation, and I hope you all have a great night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Good evening. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Garland.
You're welcome.
Yeah.